Hi, listeners. Just a quick note about this episode. We had some trouble with Bob's audio. Thanks for your patience. Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration. If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory. Hey, Bob, good to be with you again. We are back again for another episode. We are in our series here on sexual healing. I just feel conscious of saying that out loud, wanting to be sensitive to our listeners. So listeners, just God bless you for showing up. This is a place, this series we're diving into here is one that the gift of courage is one that's good. The gift of faith is good. And so we're praying that for you. And we're just glad that you're here. We have a super special guest with us today. I can't resist saying and talking, Bob, I love you, but let's start talking to this guest. So, Bob, why don't you introduce our guest who's with us today?
One of our favorite people, we can both say that, and dear friend and co-laborer in the vineyard, Sister Miriam James Heidland. So dear to so many of you, but first of all, she's dear to us. Mm. And so it's such a joy to have you sharing this with us.
Oh, thanks, y'all. Yeah, two of my favorite people right here. This is a great way to spend a morning. Definitely, yeah.
I feel like I want to go, I knew her first. I knew her before anybody else. Like the little kid in me is just going, ooh, I knew. Oh, that's so fun. Sister, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in case there are people out there who don't know. And if you don't know who Sister is, welcome to the 21st Catholic century. We'd like to introduce to you one of the greatest people on the face of the planet. Sister, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, you're very kind. Well, my name is Sister Miriam, and I'm a member of the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity, SOLT, our SOLT community. I live in the great nation of Texas. I've way down south, and I've been in my community almost 23 years now. So I grew up Catholic like a lot of people, but I never really fell in love with Christ until when I played college. I played Division I volleyball in college, and a Catholic priest came into my life who was just so in love with Jesus Christ that it changed my whole destiny. And so it's one of the reasons why when I speak there, I will never tire of speaking about authentic love, the healing power of authentic love, and the power of personal witness, because I really do believe the most powerful gospel we will ever preach is how we live our day-to-day life. And so that reality transformed my life and still continues to do so. So I'm an assistant to my general superior here in Texas, and then I travel and speak across the nation exclusively with John Paul II Healing Center and a lot of other events as well. So priest events, as the three of us know, are our favorites. So we do a lot of healing events and things like that. And just, it's a beautiful journey to bring the healing power of Christ to so many people. Yeah, because we all need it. We're all on the journey together. We all need it. So, yeah.
Amen to that. So listeners, in case you're wondering how the conversation goes, we all know each other fairly well. Mm-hmm. So this is not an unfamiliar group. We have the privilege, I'll say I have the privilege of working with these two when we do events with JP2 Healing Center for Priests. So the three of us get to be all together. Like Sister, you said, that's just a passion that we really love. And then you guys work together a lot as well on all kinds of other events for the ministry. And so we get to be around each other, which is just a treasure. Mm-hmm. So it's awesome. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming it's an act of love for us to invite you to be a guest on a sexual healing, just to share a bit about your story. Mm-hmm. And so first, I think just right out of the gate, thank you for saying yes. I mean, your story has a lot of really powerful movements of God, and I think it's just a great blessing. And I'm really grateful for, on behalf of our listeners, for your ability to share, because I think there's a lot that people are going to hear that's going to resonate with them, that they're going to be able to go, oh my, that was similar to my story. But the cool part about your story is that you dove in. I think that's what's one of the biggest, most difficult steps is you dove in, and then God met you there. And it's not like it was snap all better, but it's been this really powerful, beautiful journey. So thanks for your vulnerability. Thank you for, being willing to dive into some of these areas. I'm not really sure how to, it's kind of like awkward, like, okay, let's talk about your deepest, darkest secrets, like, no. Bob, anything on your heart kind of before as we ease into the...
Yeah, as Sister has shared this in her book, Loved as I Am. So for all of our listeners, if you want to hear more coherently this whole journey, that was several years ago, and I know that there's been so much movement and healing since you wrote that book. As we go around and speak and you share aspects of this, I just see people's hearts open, and the hope that you bring and the faith that you have, that faith and courage. It's just, I admire so much your courage of being able to walk into these areas. And so I think that's my desire, is for everybody who's listening to be able to just experience the grace that we get to experience just being around you and the people at the conferences, whether it's priest conferences or conferences for just the whole church, just to be able to experience the power of what God is doing and has done in your life, and through some very difficult circumstances.
Yeah. Sister, how does it feel to you to, as I'm just kind of thinking about how to walk people into what your story has been, would you mind if we started at kind of where most people start, which is they're doing their everyday life, and at some point they start to bump into something's not right, something's off. What was that like for you? How did you start to notice something's off, or maybe you knew of various dynamics in your heart, but you were avoiding them? Like, what was all that like for you when you first kind of bumped into these dynamics?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just, maybe before I dive in, I just want to offer just a word of just such tenderness and kindness for our listeners, because I know that these are really sacred and holy places. And I know for myself, whenever I hear someone's story, I always consider it such holy ground. And so I just want to offer that kindness to all of our listeners where they might be feeling afraid, or not really sure if they want to listen, or not really sure if they want to do this, or just know they need to. And it's terrifying, because I totally understand that. And I just want to say you're not alone. And I think that's one thing I learn more and more about people, about journeying my own story every day and hearing stories of so many people and praying with so many people, is that we are all the same, my friends. We are all the same. Our chapters might look a little different, but every single one of us is the same. Every single one of us wants to know that we are unconditionally loved, that our lives matter, and that our suffering matters, and that this is not the end of our story. So you're in good company. I just want to say you're in good company, whatever that is, whether you're somebody who's, suffered from something you haven't even told anybody, or maybe you're somebody who's perpetrated sorrow on somebody else. Like, you're most welcome here. I just want to offer that kindness to your heart. I think for me, really what I had a kind of a meltdown in religious life. So I've been in my community, like I said, almost 23 years, but about 8 years in, so about 16, 17 years ago, I was sent to a mission, to begin this mission in Seattle. And I was 28 years old, and I had started this mission, and it had novices, and I was kind of at that time in my life just managing my life really well. And I remember sitting one day we had this, before we could move into the convent, we had this tiny little apartment, and our closet was a chapel. It was like the little monsters in the chapel. It was like ridiculous, but it was the best we could do at the time. So we're crammed in this little hallway, and I'm sitting against the wall with my head against the wall. And I just remember looking at Jesus and the monstrance and just saying, I can't do this anymore. Like something is horrendously wrong in my heart, and I cannot do this anymore. I was very unhappy. I was afraid inside. I was overwhelmed with, at that time, clinical depression. I didn't know it. And it was the first inkling in my story, even though I talked about some of these things very briefly in formation. It was the first kind of impact in my heart that maybe the things that happened to me as a little girl and how I'd been trying to cope with them, maybe those things were having a direct impact on my day-to-day life. Because I had no idea. I had no idea. Like all of us, we have really sophisticated coping mechanisms. And I had no idea that what happened to me, that the secrets that had never been told, the areas of my life that had never been touched by love, were wreaking havoc. Like, they were just shattering my soul, and they were crying out to be heard. And that's the thing. Like, our hearts are always trying to tell us something. Our hearts are always crying out to be heard. And all of us have these little exile parts of us that we just push away. They were like, not today. not today.
Mm.
And we hope that they go away, but they don't go away. They just get buried alive. And
Mm.
and the whole restoration of the human person is bringing all these parts of us into communion, and not just once, but over and over again. And that's something that Christ does in my life every single day.
Mm. Mm.
You're expressing that very well, of that sense of something's not right, but not being able to go there. And what was besides that moment, what was the catalyst for you to begin to deal with it, to begin to face it? What were the events? What were the circumstances?
You know what? It's really silly. I got a book by Dr. Phil. And I was like, I'm not kidding. It was like, live
That's
your
so
best life
awesome.
ever, something. I'm like, okay, let's do that. And I went to Barnes and Noble and got a book by Dr. Phil, who was like,
Right.
and it was in that of like, because you started to journal about questions about your life.
Uh,
And I was like,
Huh.
Things I'd never really.
That's what the book asked you to do?
Yeah, it
It
was
asked
like
you to start
questions
looking at
about
your
like
life.
how you're living your life. What are you happy about? And so it started leading me down these pathways of like, oh, like your childhood, like, oh, maybe.
Huh.
And it was so it really, it's true. It was like Dr. Phil, God bless
That's
Dr.
awesome.
Phil. Like, it's like, and from there, I remember talking to my general superior at the time and just saying, I think I need to talk to somebody. And we had a beautiful woman who's affiliated with our community, was a therapist, and she was far away from me. So I couldn't see her in person. But I tell you, you know what, at the time, all I could do was we started to correspond by email, and every now and then we'd talk on the phone, but I couldn't even talk on the phone yet. Like I couldn't do that yet. And I
Mm.
emailed her back and forth for an entire year and started to
Wow.
share with her parts of my story, things that I'd never told anybody, things that I was ashamed about. And she would dutifully every week respond to me. And that was the beginning of such a gentle, kind diving into the healing process of what happened to me as a little girl, what was, and then at the end of the year, she's like, I really think you're ready enough to see somebody in person. The Lord is so gentle with us. Like he doesn't want to pry our fist
Wow.
open or try to push us in. Like he's just so kind. And so then I, saw that that's how I came to meet you guys, because that was the beginning of like, okay, I started, reading about theology of the body and healing. And I just devoured books, like all kinds of books on the subject, mostly secular, because I hadn't found anything like Christian that was really helpful for me. And then I went to the TOB Institute. I met Christopher West. I went to the TOB Institute. And then I went to the John Paul II Healing Center. And this was like 11 years ago or so. And then I met Bob. And then from that, Bob recommended that I see you, Jake. And so it's like this whole symphony of this unfolding of these layers of healing, of telling my story and hearing the Lord and receiving the Lord there, that but like I said, continues to this very day. So yeah.
Sister, that's really beautiful. That I love how you nuance the tenderness, because I think a lot of people, when they think about, I've got skeletons in my closet, or I've got a lot of pain in my life, that their assumption of the process is that it's going to be jarring and abrupt and almost re-traumatizing. And I think that's such a beautiful nuance that you're making of, the only thing you were comfortable doing was typing. It wasn't even talking, let alone in person, right? And the Lord's like, I think maybe in hindsight, I don't know, you can tell us that in hindsight, you saw that as God's tenderness. In the moment, was it more of I'm right at my edge of what I can handle? And then was it later on that you realized that God's like, I love you here, and I'm not gonna, was that part of what that was like?
Yeah, I think it was really, Jake, that was the best I could do. Like that was the most courageous I could be, was to share my story little by a woman who hadn't even met me yet. And she was so kind. Like her kindness to me and her gentle encouragement and just her strength, her truth telling. She would invite me into the truth. But like that, yes, at the time, like this is all I could do. And now I look back on it, I'm like, oh, how gracious the Lord is. Like I wouldn't have made it. Like at first I would have been like, I didn't know what to do. And so like, I'm just always overwhelmed. I talk about the kindness of Jesus a lot, because his kindness is so life-giving, and that's how he sees us. And so he's not in a hurry. Like we said, he's not trying to push us into something. And when he tells us the truth, it's always in such deep love. And so that is the way. And yes, as all of us, the three of us know, like this work is not easy. And it is hard, and it requires us to go to the depths and revisit things many times that are very difficult, but we don't go alone. And it's not, we're not in a hurry to be fixed. Like the Lord is just wants to come and be beside us. And I think that's such a different mindset of like, okay, just fix me, Lord. I want to get on with my life versus, oh, Jesus, this is so tender, and I just need you to come sit next to me, you know? So, and that's what he does. Like, that's what he does over and over again.
Yeah, I can appreciate with your therapist, and I had an opportunity to meet her at one point, and what a dear lady. But, you know, early on in my professional career, you may have experienced this too, Jake, there's such a desire to get this over with, get this healed, get past this. And so as a therapist, you can really, in your immaturity, really push somebody. And what happens if you push somebody like that, you push them away from their healing process rather than what this woman did, which was just patiently walk with you step by step by step without pushing, speaking truth, but not pushing. And so she was honoring your heart through the whole time. And she didn't have an agenda for you. She just was Jesus with you. And it's such a beautiful picture.
Oh, that's very well put. That's exactly what she was. Yeah. It is.
I think, I mean, just for a moment as a therapist, gosh, some of my biggest mistakes as a therapist have been when I've lost sight of the person in front of me. And I've just gone into what I know the path could look like. And then ultimately what starts happening is I'm there for them and for me. I don't want to get off into a therapist track, Bobby, and I can talk about this kind of stuff later. But I think if you want to get into a zone that will if you want to choose something that will make you a saint, choose to accompany people who are broken, like hands down, because what that will do is it requires agape to come out of you. Otherwise, it doesn't go very well, or it hops around and it's not as smooth. And the saint making process is what has made me just bang my head against the wall because I'm not there, and yet it still requires that. But all that aside, I think, sister, that I just love that you were giving the best you could, and I really hope that listeners can hear that's okay. It's okay. Because I don't, was there ever a voice in you that started to go, this isn't good enough, or was it so overwhelming maybe that the fact that you were starting to be honest, I think there's a really valuable first step, like truth telling was, I think, what you said. Did you notice any like negative voices happening in that season as you started to be honest that maybe were distracting from the process or complicating it?
Well, I think from what I remember of that stage is because I didn't know anybody in therapy and religious life. Like I didn't know anybody in counseling. I didn't know, we didn't talk about stuff like this. Like I didn't know that other people had been sexually abused. Like I didn't know that other people had struggled with addiction. For me, it was like breaking ground in my own heart of like, I don't know what to do here. And I was trying to like find my way, through it. And the fear, I remember, sometimes I do share this with people, is like the fear that I had with my therapist for that year was like, okay, this is it. This is finally going to be the email where she's like, you are crazy and you are disgusting and you're perverted and you're gross and I don't want to be with you anymore. You shouldn't be a nun. Like that was always my fear of like, okay, when I tell her this, like this time she's going to say, whoa, girl. And you know what? She never did. Like, and that for me was, she received my heart each time, and she would tease out the areas where she could hear me, that I had lies about myself, things that I was believing that wasn't true. She would often correct like misconceptions that I had, or just areas where I was going astray. And in that, she would always reaffirm the goodness of who I was, and one of the things that she told me one time, she's like, every time you tell your truth, no matter how shabby it seems to you, it lets in a little bit of God's light and grace. Right. And that's what heals us. And so it's like, to me, the truth felt so shabby. Like it was so abhorrent to me. And it was things that I'd never told, things that I couldn't even admit to myself. Like here I'm writing them on an email. And so it was like such a verbalization finally of things that were buried alive in my heart, but that finally found a safe place. And I think that's what, I was listening to a masterclass on trauma a couple of weeks ago. I learned so much about it, and so much they're talking about area brain science and somatic experiencing and things like that. But what research is showing is that safety is the number one key in healing, because you won't heal if you don't feel safe. And so she was safety for me where I could tell her the truth and she would love me no matter what. And that was a tangible experience of authentic love that was like so transforming to me.
Yeah.
Mm.
What really strikes me there as you're describing it is you had all of these beliefs about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
the shame beliefs, I'm disgusting, this is
Mm-hmm.
all. And you're expecting that she's going to perceive you that way because that's what we do is we project our shame onto other people.
Yeah.
And yet she's just beating you with the love of God, which is so genuine inside of her heart,
Mm-hmm.
seeing your goodness.
Yeah.
And as you bring that shame into her goodness, into God's goodness, into God's love,
Yes.
that there's transformation. That's safety.
Mm-hmm.
Because our worst fear is that somebody's going to confirm the beliefs we have about ourselves.
Oh gosh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Gosh, sister, there's so many. Honestly, I think what's going on, what's happening in my head is I see the anatomy of a wound chart.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my mind, I'm noticing that because, sister, you're implying it. I'm just curious if you could speak to maybe this a little bit more. Then we'll take another step maybe in that chart. So the outer circle are vows, and you're implying in a way that you anticipated that people wouldn't receive you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm imagining that that probably made you guarded in some way, right? You said, I was hurt. You had other beliefs. We'll get to that maybe in a bit, but then you stopped doing things and you started doing things to protect those dynamics. And it sounds like vulnerability was one thing that you stopped doing because you're like, this isn't safe. So that's a good example of a vow. I won't be vulnerable anymore. What were some of the other things maybe that you noticed that you were doing to protect yourself?
Oh gosh.
That felt like normal?
Yeah, that doesn't it? That's great saying it feels like normal, doesn't it? Like this is just how we live our life. And so I think I had a whole host of conscious and subconscious inner vows and beliefs about vulnerability, about men can't be trusted, because I mean really what we're talking about here is I when I look at my life, I believe people have like 1, 2, or 3 what I call break points in their foundation where they have like just areas of deep sorrow, and those things to me it's like everything else from there is like variations on a theme. And so for me, I mean, I talk for a long time. For me, it was this reality of being sexually abused at 11 years old, okay, and being introduced to pornography and all that goes along with that, and just such self-hatred and disgust and contempt with myself, and that reality being so shattered. I think I wrote in my book that there was a moment after the sexual abuse happened, and it happened many times, but I remember I was sitting there and I had one sock on. I'm 11 years old and I had one sock on, and I just remember looking out the window and just part of me died that day. It just died. And the very interesting thing in that masterclass on trauma, what they were saying is what they know now is that the trauma is twofold. The first trauma is the trauma that happened, but they said the second trauma is actually almost as serious as the first, is that you have no safe person to tell it to. So you have to bear it by yourself. And so for me, I'm 11 years old. My life is shattered. I remember going to have dinner after that. And like, and I look back now on that little girl and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so hard. And you just go on. And I got good grades in school and I was good in sports. And inside I like had all these beliefs about sexuality, about myself, about my body, about God, about I'm not going to be vulnerable. I can't trust you. So like all these things are happening. And then, I started drinking at 12 years old. My 12th birthday, I started drinking. And then at 13, I'm raped by a 19-year-old boyfriend. And I become very promiscuous after that. And that's normal for me. Like, I don't know another way, because see what's underpinning that in all of that is really the deeper wound as being abandoned in the womb by my biological mother. So I'm given up for adoption. I'm conceived out of wedlock. My biological parents are 17 years old. And how is a 17-year-old girl bond to her child she's about to give up? She doesn't. Like, there's a lot of ambivalence. I don't know her, but I just, in my own journey. So there's no safety even in the womb. I think I made vows in the womb. Like, I know that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but I know myself, like, how do you survive? Like, you're about to be given away. And then being given away, not being nursed, not being held, not being in a hospital, then going to a foster home for 3 months. And then after that, being taken from the foster home and then given to parents that I was raised by. So, I mean, you could just see the massive attachment trauma of this place in my heart where I felt perpetually unsafe, perpetually unloved, and perpetually like it's my fault. I must be bad. So here's the core belief: I'm bad. This is happening to me because I'm bad. And to make up for that, I will do anything it takes to be loved. So you can see the whole framework from that. And you can see in my day-to-day life of caretaking, of people pleasing, of showing up for people, of never saying no, because if I just show up for you enough, then you won't abandon me. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's fascinating what we will go to. And even to this day, I see the residual effect of that, of like, just this morning, I was praying about a very tender place in my heart of receiving that infant once again on my own heart and just letting her be and bringing her to safety and telling her she doesn't have to do that anymore. Like, you don't have to people please. You don't have to do that. Like, you can show up and be yourself, and people that really love you, they will love you. So it's like this, it's like, it's the shattering of the soul. Like Dan Allender says, you know, like it's the most insidious thing that can happen. Like the shattering of our sexuality, because he says one of the most traumatic things that I'm just want to tell our listeners is that many times in sexual abuse, there's also sexual arousal. And so there's a deep ambivalence of the hatred of one's own body, of what's happening, because it's in the context of something really manipulative and twisted. Many times you've been groomed by kindness. You've been groomed by people that you live with. You've been groomed by people that are family members, or, you know, and there's all kinds of things happening. And so you're absolutely abhorrently disgusted with yourself. At the same time, you're hating what's happening, and you're hating it's like, it is like a cocktail of just so many sorrowful things happening all at once. And then you just put it all in the box and you go about your life, you know, like how do you do that? And then you get married, or you enter religious life, or you ordained a priest, or what are you supposed to do? You know? And so it's like, no wonder our hearts are so wounded, because there's all these tender parts that have never been cared for, you know? So.
As you're speaking about yourself as 11 years old, my grandchildren are that age.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing what it would be like to not know, and that they're living with this, coming to the dinner table, living with this secret, living with this terrible pain, and nobody noticing, nobody seeing, you're not having the freedom to share. It just makes it so real to be present to you at that age, and just terrific. Just the isolation and the disconnection that has to happen in your heart to survive there.
Yeah, isolation, disconnection. Those are some of the vows I made too, of like, I just can't tell anybody. And I think that was one of the best pieces of advice that my therapist gave me is, you know, next time you're out on the playground doing recess duty, go look at 11-year-old girls, because they're really little. And we tend to psychologize our current age onto ourselves and say, what's wrong with you? It's like, it's self-contempt, right? It's how we try to manage the pain. What's wrong with you? Why couldn't you get yourself together? And 11 years old is 16 years old, 8, they're terrifyingly young. Oh my goodness. How do you don't even have the ability to cope with anything at that age. Like, how are you supposed to cope with something like those things, you know? So.
Well, I think I want to just allow our listeners a moment to breathe, because sister, just hearing your story, again, I'm on the verge of tears, and one could say that I should be numb to these things by now, because, you know, you hear them unfortunately so much, but I think the tenderness that I'm hearing you talk about, even as you talk about your story, like you're even moved to tears because you're describing these almost relationships that you've developed with these parts of you. And I love what you just said about safety. And I can hear the growth that you've made. Like, there's safety with others, but there's also, you're talking about how you grew in safety with yourself and within yourself. That and the this concept of a part of me is a lot more real than I think people realize. The very, very extreme version of this is actually a diagnosable disorder called dissociative identity disorder. But all disorders is a twisting really badly of something that's normal. And so if you untwist that really extreme version of coping, which is DID, you get these parts of us that kind of break off, or I can't go on. And there's several things that you listed in your story that are just like so powerful, but not good, an abandonment very early on, but multiple layers of abandonment. And that's just such a powerful thing that you've done, because you've labeled them, right? You've come to terms with your story as it is. And so it's like early womb stuff, and then post-birth stuff, and then going into another family. And then you fast forward to 11, and there's a cluster of things that seem to happen in there that are really life-altering. And the visual of the one sock is just so crystal clear. And then going to dinner. And then you fast forward to 19. And 19 is like a re-traumatization of all the old stuff, right? And then you keep going, and at some point in there, right, you bump into God in a way through this priest. So I'm filling in a little bit there because I know your story. So there's this priest, this man who comes into your life, who I'm guessing you went, he's not like the others. And there's something different about him. And so one of the things I think you're saying that I just want to highlight for people is you're describing the experience of shame so well, where there's an internal dynamic and an external dynamic. John Paul II talks about shame, where he says there's almost an inner self and a projected outer self. And the inner self is having all of this dynamic, but then it's also what are you going to do to me when you see me and encounter me thing. So both of those dynamics are active. And the thing I love about, John Paul, God bless him. I don't even know if that's the right thing to say, but thank you, God, for him. But anyway, like he said that the thing that you're longing for in shame is acceptance and affirmation. And there's this longing mixed with fear. That's what shame is I'm longing to be blessed and loved by you, and I'm terrified by you at the same time. Can you just for a moment, like, bring us into what happened with that priest? Now, for you as a priest, for other people, it can be other, everybody's maybe got a different story, but what was it about that priest that you met that ultimately is why you're a religious and you joined this whole community? Like, what was that like now that we have context? Like, he must have been like a flashing sign of grace or something. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was certainly a divine interruption of my life. And that was one of the first things I noticed about Father. And he'd been a priest a long time, so he's an older priest and very much a father figure. But he was just different. He lived differently. And that man just chose to spiritually father me and just to love me. And he didn't want anything from me. He wasn't trying to use me. He wasn't using me to get his own needs met. He just truly loved me as a spiritual daughter, and he would tell me the truth whether I wanted to hear it or not. He would call me to excellence. He could see beauty in me where I only saw self-hatred and just disgust. He saw beauty. He saw promise. He would challenge me. It's like, why are you living like that? Like, why are you dating that guy? He doesn't treat you very well. Like, so he would come into my life and say, what is God saying to you here? What do you think Jesus would say to you? And it was just watching him live his life. There's a lot of things in life you can fake. You cannot fake authentic holiness because it just emanates from you. And there were many times where I could literally see the face of Christ. I could see the eyes of Jesus looking at me through his face. He was so in love with Christ, and not perfect. I certainly had his own story, but like, he was so in love with Christ that it emanated from him, and it was so captivating. I felt safe in his presence. I knew that he loved me, and I knew he wouldn't hurt me, and he only wanted what was best for me. And so it was the initial encounter with authentic love, which, can I just say very frankly, like, the two of you have offered me that as well. Like, both of you as men have been so healing in my life, where you've come into my life and you've come freely and beautifully and authentically. And it's helped heal my heart as a woman, where it's going against those lies that I made, that men can't be trusted, or that men are selfish, or that men will just use you. And I mean, these, Father, and the two of you are beautiful examples of the truth of a heart that loves well as a man, that is so deeply healing, especially for a woman,
Sister, that's just thank you for that. I think what's going on in my heart is you're very easy to love.
Oh.
And
I was thinking the same thing. It hasn't been a struggle.
Oh, you're very kind.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, because at this point in your story, you're not in therapy,
Mm-mm.
but healing's happening.
Amen. That's a good point.
And I think I just want to highlight that for our listeners is, Bob, you and I experienced this, I think, when we encountered the hearts of people that long to be healed, which is good. And in the fear and all the various movements that come out of those wounds, there's really strong beliefs about how healing needs to go. And so it's very normal in our hurt to try to control the process. And then when we don't get the process met that we think, then we think it's going to fail and nothing's going to work. And sister, what you're describing so beautifully is that you were in a healing journey before you even knew it. You know, like God was drawing close via his ambassadors, quote unquote. And that's just so powerful, because I can think about the same thing in my life, that people who started to show me the face of God before I even realized I needed to see his face, or before I even realized I got stuff in me that needs to be addressed. I imagine that created some kind of basis for you that, okay, love does exist, kindness is real. And then you had another experience, probably had littler ones, but the big ones. Then you met that therapist, and you start emailing with her, and then you keep growing. And then I'm triple checking in my head because you've said this publicly. So then you and I met in a professional kind of setting, even though it was, and so then that was another step in the journey. And so anything there, sister, that just jumps out at you about this progression of healing in the midst of your story? Like what do you feel there?
Well, that's a great, I appreciate that you draw that out there, because it was healing before I even knew it was happening. And like, that's so wonderful. And I really do believe that God sends people in our life to open the door for us, you know. And like we often say in Healing the Whole Person, you know, authentic love is healing, and healing, wherever love is, healing continually happens, whether it's in an official therapeutic setting, but more often in the day-to-day moments of life. And I think that's why when we talk about, you know, how do you show up for people? Are we a safe place for people? Like, how do we, in our day-to-day life, like what are we facilitating in our lives, you know? And so I think that's how it works. Like, that's the face of Christ. Like, that's him revealing his heart to us and bringing us into communion there. And so, yeah, in the places that we're absolutely convinced nobody will love us in a place, you know, they do. And it's so deeply healing and just so deeply freeing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. If I can jump here, I'm just conscious of so much to talk about, and you know, this little bit of time, if it's just everything is so beautiful. But if what's amazing to me is 11 years later, how freely you're able to share. And I know that there's been two main movements in that. One is God freeing you from your shame, and it's been a progressive thing. And also you're forgiving. You're learning how to forgive. Could you just share about both of those?
Yeah. Yes. I you know, it's like we said, we only heal from what we feel safe to heal from. And so this has been a deep journey of, you know, what I can freely talk about you today, which is, I speak with great reverence to my own heart and to our listeners. These are things I couldn't admit to myself 20 years ago. Like, I couldn't admit to myself in a dark room, forget about putting it out there for the world to see. And so it's a great testament to just the tenderness of God and the restoration of his love. And so I have been, you know, very serious about this journey. I'm very serious about it. It's been 16 years of very serious work of I'm always open to, I want to learn and grow every day. And so that reality of the Lord bringing me continually through layers of the facets of my heart where he's bringing me into communion is very important to me. And so I take this journey very seriously. And another linchpin, as you alluded to, Bob, very, very deeply, is the area of forgiveness in my life. And because one of the things that kept me so sick and so addicted and so broken for so long is that I had a profound misunderstanding of what forgiveness was. And I thought, you know, it's like, just get over it. If you forgive somebody, that you let them off the hook. You know, just to tell you that I know who my abuser is, and I have confronted them twice, and they're not sorry. Okay. They're not sorry at all. So what are you supposed to do? Like, what are you supposed to do then? You know, and I was just, so when we talk about forgiveness, this is a journey that I make in my own heart very often, you know, and the understanding that forgiveness is not saying that what happened didn't matter. It's actually taking a full account of exactly what happened, being very honest about the details, and bringing that to Christ, releasing our grasp on them through the power of Christ, and commending them to God and asking him to take care of the situation. That justice will be served. It just won't be served by me. Thank God, and, we continually grasp. It's like, I often use the parable of the unforgiving servant, where he's he's choking the person who owes him a mere fraction of what he owed the master. And he's choking him, saying, pay back what you owe. And I think, very honest, dear listeners, like, that's what we're doing when we have unforgiveness. We're choking the people that have hurt us, and we're saying, you pay back what you owe me. And they can't pay us back. So we're stuck in this cycle of deep pain, deep betrayal, deep bitterness. And they can't pay us back ultimately for what they've, quote unquote, taken. So what are we supposed to do? And it's in those very places to grieve. There's a power of lamentation, of grief. Like, grief has to be expressed. Like, I think that's an untapped resource in our faith, of just the power of honest, authentic. This was really hard, and it was really unfair, and it hurts, and just to wail. And there's such a power of that truth that's beyond, you did this to me, and this is my fault. I hate myself. There's something so, I'm even touching it more deeply in my own heart, of something so transformative and so powerful about lamentation, of just sitting at the foot of the cross and lamenting and letting it out over and over and over again. And then surrendering it to God and asking him to speak the truth. Because I can tell you this, it moves me to tears every time I say it. Like, I don't know on this earth if my abuser will ever be sorry. And he can't get back to me what he's taken. Like, he can't. But I can honestly tell you this, like, he's broken, like, he's shattered inside. And from what I know, I don't even know if he knows his own story. And to me, like, that's the real poverty. And if I ever get to heaven, I want him there with me one day, because he's broken like I am, just in a different way. Like, his pathway just took a different path. And I pray and I fast for him, And I still go to the foot of the cross when I feel the spiritual scars, the emotional scars of what's happened that reverberates through my soul, even at almost 45 years old, all these years later. I'm like, just, Lord, just come and heal us both, Because I don't know of a better way than that, just to continue to go through with the Lord and ask for continued healing and freedom and mercy, because I want to live, and I want to be well, and I want to love well. And if that's what this whole journey has been, the sovereignty of God in my life, to shatter my heart open so I could love a little bit like him, it's worth it.
If I can just name 3 fruits of that I've seen in your life that are touching thousands. One is your capacity to feel, and to feel compassion, and to enter into other people's story, and to have compassion even for the person who abused you is just remarkable. And I think that's one of the fruits that I see. Second fruit that I've seen is just the freedom as you've forgiven, how freely you receive. It's just like, before that there was a barrier to receiving. And now I just see you receiving deeper and deeper levels. Then the third I get to witness all the time as we go around and you share your story, and you lead people through the process of forgiveness. And the thousands of people are getting free because of what you were willing to walk through. And, the gift that you have of being able to share that, and the courage you have to be able to share that. It's just remarkable. Just it's like a Niagara Falls force of grace that has come through your heart through all you've walked through. Just remarkable.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh, sister, that is so powerful. You're describing of, like, what's going on for me as you're sharing that about your abuser is this. I'm marveling. I feel like when you talk about lamenting at the foot of the cross, I feel like you're showing me the cross, and I'm looking at it going, how, like, that guy, that person who's hurt you, going, how can you, it's a more immature reaction, but I just want to shake him, and then, like, how could you not? And then, but you've articulated, I mean, you've said it so beautifully. He's terribly shattered inside. It's a phrase we know, but sister, you I think popularize it in a lot of circles as wounded people wound people, just as a footnote about, why do I want to go through this? Like, look at her, look at sister, she's a wreck. Why would I want to go through this? Like, Like, what's the alternative? Like, to perpetuate woundedness and perpetuate, whatever. And I imagine that maybe you're, I'm kind of all over the place, so forgive me, but imagine your current self would almost be unrecognizable to your 20-year ago self, and going, I have no idea how that is going to happen. Like the path between probably feels impossible. And this is what drives me crazy sometimes about modern culture is, you remember the show The Biggest Loser, where they would do it was like the one show where they showed you the middle between the before and after picture. And they actually showed you what went on to get from before to after. And I think so many times we just have this idea that, well, I just want to get to the after. And what you're describing so richly is the in-between. That's the critical zone. And it's so powerful to see the before and after pictures right side by side. But that little white space in the middle, that's where all the stuff happens. Like, that's where all the I guess I want to ask you a question that I know the answer to. I long to hear what you say is, was it worth it?
It's so worth it, Jake. It's worth every moment of it. I wouldn't have it any other way. It is worth it. And I become more of myself, who I truly am every day because of this journey. I look at myself 20 years ago and just the things I didn't know and just the tender places I'd yet to encounter and all the areas of my life. And it's worth it. It's so worth it. And people ask me that all the time. Like, is it worth it? It's very hard. Is it worth it? We could really ask ourselves, is the crucifixion worth it?
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
It's worth it. And we're constantly living out that life of Christ, the suffering, death, and resurrection of Christ in our lives over and over and over again. And he's bringing us into his wounds and he's sharing ours. And it is worth it. I wouldn't have it any other way. It's so worth it.
Amen.
Probably need to bring closure, but not sure how to close.
Well, I think I have an idea.
Okay.
Bob, what do you, sister, if you'll allow us, because I think I'd love for people to peek behind the curtain that Bob and I get a regular front row seat, literally a front row seat to how God, what he's done in your life and how that blesses other people. And Bob, I wonder if we could just share a little bit of honoring for sister, but let our listeners hear it, because we see it all the time. And one of the first things that comes to my mind is, sister, I've seen you transform and redeem a journey with regard to femininity. Like, my wounds come through women. And watching you do what you've done is so healing to me, because it gives me hope again. And it reminds me of, this is holy woman. This is woman as she was designed to be, which is healing for me. So your journey, at times, maybe for people, it might feel like it's in a silo, but as I've encountered you, it restores my experience of women. And go, oh, there's what God designed and intended. That's more of what he had in mind. And that's a huge part of my story. Like you're part of the mosaic that makes up me having a redeemed image of the heart of a woman. And I think another one that comes to mind right off the bat is I can visually see us at the center with a group of priests or seminarians or whatever. And I've literally talked to them and regularly heard them say, she just healed me, about talking about you. And as I've like, what is it? And I've thought, it's, you understand the brokenness and you still receive them with tenderness. And that, quote unquote, shouldn't happen. The emotional modern man math doesn't add up. That shouldn't be the case. And so you're like this walking scripture of sorts. where we go, that shouldn't happen, but oh wow. And so the tenderness of your voice, where I imagine it wasn't so tender at some point, right? It wasn't like this all the time. So I just marvel, and I think this is, I love sitting at your feet, and receiving from you. It's amazing, like watching God take the brokenness, restore it, and then it just like pours forth life to people. I've seen you spiritually mother so many people as a celibate woman, and people's lives get changed, right? I've had prayer sessions with priests, and all they talked about was you the whole time, right? And I'm like, do we want to? I'm like, no, let's just, okay, I'm good with this. So I just want to like thank you for your courage, because I know it's not easy, but you've continually said yes. You've given me an image of like Our Lady's something like that, and I want to be close to her. I'm just so grateful. I could keep going and going. Bob, what comes to your mind just about?
Just like affirm a lot of what you're saying. It's over and over again in our priest retreats, seminarian retreats. Just your presence alone before even you share, but then as you share and then as you minister, just they experience such a tender, a gentle love and honesty and courage that really literally changes their life. And I don't even have to go out to them, because I experience that, as Jake says, myself. And just in some of our interactions, first, your capacity, because of where you've walked, you've given me a vision of what courage looks like in our woundedness, and how Jesus beats us there. And so it's both an example of the grace of vulnerability that I personally benefit from, but also, sometimes we've shared and you've just been able to feel the compassion for any place in my own heart. Is such a gift to have somebody in that kind of purity just be able to feel with you and love with you, and the same kindness that you've received from Jesus you now exude, and the same compassion that you've received you now exude. And so when you say it's worth it not just for you, but it's worth it for all of us, what you walked through. And it's been such a gift. And I learn all the time from you, just by the way you walk through the journey. And it's such a gift to teach with you, except for, after speaking, all these people rushing up, I know it's a little overwhelming, but you can tell that not just the priest, but every man and woman, I can just tell you story after story of people coming up and how deeply they've been touched. So you're like the woman who broke the flask of alabaster at the feet of Jesus, and just the perfume just emanates.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, sister, thank you so much for your courage. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for all the yeses that you've made in the secret places that no one maybe has ever seen, because the fruit is very rich, and it's wonderful to partake of with you. I think I'll sum it up by watching you have gone through what you've gone through. It really takes sanctity out of an imaginary fairy tale and puts it in real fleshy experience, to where you can go, holiness is real. Saints can be real. Like that whole universal call to holiness, everybody's called to be a saint. It's not like, when I'm around you, I go, it's not a fairy tale. Like, it's not, it's real. And I've touched with my own hands, I've seen with my own eyes. And so I'm just very grateful for you. I think,
Do you want to have the last few words here, sister, before Jake closes us?
I just want to say thank you. You've honored me both very deeply, and I love you very much. And you guys have been a safe place for me. Like, you're part of the mosaic of how I am today. Like, that's the beauty about love in the Christian community, right? Like, we're part of each other's story, and I couldn't have done it without either one of you, and I still can't, so I'm very grateful. And I'm grateful for this podcast. I'm grateful that the two of you, through your hearts and how you've grown as men, are giving people a place of freedom, of safety, to find healing and to find Christ and to talk about things they don't know how to talk about. You're giving them a voice for that. And so it's an honor to be on the journey with you. And I'm so grateful for each of you. So thank you so much.
Listeners, thanks for being with us. You might need to go buy another box of tissues. You can get that at your local Walmart or other places that you find tissues. If you want to find out more about Sister and just what she's up to, I would highly recommend you go check out her podcast with two other great people, one of which is my wife, Heather, and Michelle Bensinger. That's Abiding Together. If you haven't heard of that podcast, welcome as well to the modern Catholic era. It's one of the best. And then you can find other places, Sisters on Twitter, One Groovy Nun, and we'll put other links to the show notes about where you can, just follow Sister's life. And listeners, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to pray for Sister, because as she labors in love, labor pains don't always feel good. And so if you can just, take a moment, maybe right now, right after you flip off this episode, and just say a quick prayer that God would bless Sister and continue to work in her life, because there's so much fruit that comes from it. So Sister, again, we're grateful for you. Bob, as always, good to be with you. And listeners, we pray that you would continue to experience the love, healing, and mercy of God.